individuals like me or Iranian people are not advocating, let's do it. That's why I responded to your call and doing this interview. All we have to do is tell the fact, what we hear, what we feel from our family members, what's happening to them, the amount of hopelessness, the amount of addiction, rise of addiction, the amount of rise of suicide by setting themselves in fire. Is so high that if you look at it from any just slight level of research, you can see this shows that there is a lot of repression going on. And who is doing this repression? Is the regime.
And we can help by asking questions, asking your representatives if they would look into what's going on, if they would keep us informed of human rights violations. If we have delegates in the UN, we could email.
Definite policy option. There are many policies. There are a very important policy options here. It doesn't require any spending of any budget, US budget or any other country's budget. Iranian people, just like any individual who want to defend their home, they want to defend the security of their own country. They consider the regime is the #1 enemy who is threatening their personal security, their family's security, and their country's security. They need to be supported, morally supported. We don't need any invasion, any war against Iran would actually help the regime to stay in power.
The war would help them to stay in power.
Yes, so definitely that's not a good option. Continuing the so-called negotiation and appeasement, and as a result of that, ignoring the opposition and the organized resistance movement that is happening is also definitely not helping. It's have been prolonging the life of this regime. The life of this regime got prolonged. This regime is financing terrorism around the world. Now, if people couldn't believe it before, look what's happening in Iraq now. Look what happened in Lebanon a year ago. This regime is financing any effort that destabilizes the security of the Middle East, and any terrorist group that may want to attack let's say Western countries.
And much of their financing comes out of the sale of the resources, the oil out of
sale
Iran.
Of the oil of Iran, rather than the funding to be spent on development projects, on building the opportunities for youth to have employment so they can have a decent earning, they can have a decent life, they can get married, they can buy properties. They cannot do any of those. The inflation is just mind-boggling.
As a point too, I remember you telling me about where you grew up in Isfahan, and how across the street from your home there was a school. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show about your first-hand experience. Tell me about that school.
Actually, it was the youth organization facility. It was a very nice youth organization with nice lawn, amphitheaters that art programs could be presented, classrooms, and it was connected. A community center connected to a couple of colleges, I think, in the city. At that time, I was in high school, so I couldn't use it much. But I heard after revolution, the regime closed down that place, and then later on opened it up as a place to train the paramilitary group and suicide bombers. This regime actually advertises in their own paper that they hire people, men or women, to come and be trained to so-called export Iranian regime's form of justice to the world.
And why would someone do that if they were?
Brainwashing takes different shape and form. But at the end of the day, when I look at it, because my work is with NGOs and international development, the root is that when there is hopelessness, when there is no opportunity for development, when there is no empowerment, personal empowerment, you are trained to believe that you have no control over your lives, and you need to follow these directions to have a salvation.
And told often enough that if the way to salvation and the way to heaven is one certain way that they keep repeating,
and then they get financed. Many of them, like mercenary, they get.
They wouldn't be able to leave money to their family.
They not only family themselves. Yes, for example, the university admissions. The government completely controlled university admissions, and they have been reserving a good portion of it for these people who accepted to be some sort of mercenary for the regime and participate in the crackdown, participate in the operation. They in schools, in society, in streets, in alleys, in the places of employment, anywhere they could see, they could operate. They go back to the regime, and they as part of these agencies they're part of, they get lots of money. So it's a form of lucrative employment to participate in the destruction that the regime is doing.
Which would be very tempting if you were living in a culture and society where you were looking at very high unemployment and inflation and repression by a government and certain jailing just for simple things, or you could become a friend to the government and be paid a lot of money and live a very nice, comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah, it's like a mafia system. When you look at it, so as you said, it's sophisticated, the regime is sophisticated. Yes, they studied how Hitler operated, how Mussolini operated, how the mafia system and gangs operate in communities, and leverage all the lessons and best practices of dark ages. You go back, you see all that. You see what Dracula did in Europe in those years. You see all those worst practices that humanity put it behind, and as part of civilization, it should be behind us. I mean, stoning. When you look at the Jesus parable, 2,000 years ago, should have been abolished. We didn't have it in our culture. I don't even remember it. The only time we remember it was in stories, in Bible. We read it that those days they did that, and it's happening today in Iran. Of course, regime doesn't want the rest of the world to know, but they if you open the judicial books, they sentence people and they actually carried it out in hiding. They cut limbs, hands and legs for petty thieves, whereas the regime itself is the grand thief.
And you mentioned exporting, and I don't know if this is an example actually of exporting, but you had told me earlier about a story that happened in Canada of an honor killing.
Yes, you know, the threat of fundamentalism as this Khomeini's regime got into power is threatening the rest of the world. What I mentioned is the impact of this regime on Iranian people. But this regime, in order to stay in power, it has to export its line of thinking. It has to export its agencies and mercenaries across the world and encourage this line of thinking, encourage this line of behavior so that they can create unstable communities and further and further take away the personal freedom and the liberties of civilization.
Is there a kind of formula that they use that you can identify?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. You know, when you look at when you just look at the surface of the language of the scholars who support the regime or the regime's the so-called diplomats, they say we are resisting against Western influence. So, to them, achievement of humanity, civilization, achievements of Iranian people over we have a very rich history of civilization, are against the values our own poets like Hafiz, Sadi, Rumi, and many of our own scholars for years have disseminated. They are against all those. So it's not that they are against Western or Eastern. They are against humanity.
So civilization.
Civilization. So when you read, whenever you listen to their sentences, you gotta be able to interpret